The Return to Bath. Chapter 1. The Journey Down. Lady Eleanor Fairfax had never cared for sudden changes of plan. She preferred life arranged in calm lines, mornings for correspondence, afternoons for walking or reading, evenings for conversation and music. Even on festive occasions she liked to know, more or less, what would be expected of her. Yet nothing in her well-ordered imagination had prepared her to be seated opposite her aunt in a carriage rumbling toward Bath, her bridal trousseau hastily packed away like evidence of a crime. "Do not hold yourself so rigidly, my dear," said Mrs. Lindley, regarding her with anxious affection. "You will break in half before we reach the posting-house." "I am quite well, aunt," Eleanor replied, though her spine ached and her hands, clenched in her lap, had left crescent marks in her gloves. "Well, nonsense. A girl jilted days before her wedding cannot possibly be well, however sensible she may be." Her aunt sighed. "I shall never forgive Mr. Harbury. Look at you, pale as linen, and all because he reconsidered." The memory of that word still stung. Philip Harbury had pronounced it with an air of deep thought, as though he were choosing between two patterns of wallpaper, not unravelling a life I have reconsidered, Eleanor. I fear our temperaments do not quite suit. Temperaments, Eleanor murmured now, gazing out at the passing countryside. How fortunate he discovered the mismatch before the vows were spoken. It was exactly the sort of remark that would be praised as sensible and composed. It sounded very nearly like gratitude. Only Eleanor knew that beneath the level tone lay humiliation, a hot, throbbing humiliation that no amount of composure could entirely hide. Mrs. Lindley sniffed. "Temperaments indeed. Your temperament is too honest. That is the trouble. You would not flatter him into imagining himself profound." "Aunt. Very well, I will say no more." She paused, then added, "At least not until supper." Despite herself, Eleanor's lips curved. Bath was her aunt's solution to everything. "The waters will do you good," she had declared, "and the air, and the change of scene. London is a nest of sharp tongues. In Bath, people will be too occupied with their own aches and ailments to dwell on your misfortunes." Eleanor doubted that Bath society was as oblivious as her aunt imagined. Still, the notion of leaving London, of leaving the house where flowers ordered for her wedding had withered unused, felt like a mercy. By the time they swept into Great Pulteney Street, the sky over Bath had deepened into a cool March blue with the faintest promise of spring in the air. Their hired house, tall and elegant, caught the light on its pale stone facade. A small part of Eleanor, buried beneath the bruised pride, acknowledged its beauty. Her first days in Bath were arranged around quiet. She walked in Sydney Gardens at hours when few people chose to promenade. She read, though her eyes often slipped from the page. She listened to her aunt's gentle chatter and the housekeeper's reports and tried not to think of the church in London where she was to have stood, white and calm, declaring vows that would now never be spoken. On the fourth day, a letter arrived from Miss Anne Durrant, Eleanor's oldest friend. "My dearest Eleanor, I cannot sufficiently express my indignation toward Mr. Harbury. But allow me to relieve your mind of one thing. The talk here is less vicious than you suppose. There is speculation, of course, but much of it blames him. Some say his mother persuaded him to prefer another lady whose dowry is more immediate. You may imagine how I receive such talk. I tell them they are unworthy to mention your name. I only wish I had been able to prevent your hurt. You have escaped a weak man. That is something, though I know it must feel like cold comfort now. Your most affectionate, Anne." Eleanor read the letter twice. The notion that Harbury had been influenced by his mother, and by money, was sadly plausible. It did nothing to soothe her pride, but it altered the quality of her pain. Where before there had been a sharp sense of personal rejection, there was now a weary understanding that she had been weighed and measured in some ledger and found wanting. Her aunt found her with the letter on her lap and her gaze unfocused. "Come," said Mrs. Lindley, brisk but kind. "You shall not brood all day. I have decided that we will go at last to the pump room." Eleanor tensed. "Must we?" "We must. If you do not appear, people will only talk more. We shall go. You will drink the water and find it vile. You will sit where everyone may see that your neck is unbroken, your heart is still beating, and you are not in exile for a crime. It is the only way." Eleanor knew her aunt was right. Pride and fear warred inside her. Pride won by the smallest margin. The pump room was already busy when they entered, warmed by bodies and light, filled with the strains of gentle music from the musicians' gallery. Eleanor wore a modest gown of dove-grey muslin, her bonnet tied firmly beneath her chin. She would not be noticed, she told herself. She was wrong. Within moments she felt heads turn. A murmur passed through the crowd, like the subtle shifting of wind. There she is, the jilted one. Some gazes held pity, others contained a sharper glint of amusement. Eleanor lifted her chin a fraction, the tiny movement all that remained of her once unquestioned confidence. "Ah," her aunt said suddenly sotto voce. "Eleanor, prepare yourself. The Duke of Averton is here." Her heart stopped, then resumed with an uncomfortable thud. She turned, and time folded. Adrian Thorne, Duke of Averton, stood only a few yards away, bowing to a cluster of acquaintances. His dark hair, neatly cut, contrasted with the crisp whiteness of his neckcloth. His coat was a deep blue that suited his height and breadth. His manner was as contained as ever. Only his eyes, clear grey, steady, had not changed, though they seemed to rest now on the world with greater gravity than before. Once, years ago, those eyes had looked at her with something like hope. Now they turned and found her. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Then he recovered, made his way through the crowd, and bowed with perfect courtesy. "Mrs. Lindley, Lady Eleanor, I had not been aware you were in Bath." "Your Grace," said Mrs. Lindley, bobbing an approving curtsy. "We arrived but a few days ago. The journey was mercifully uneventful." Eleanor managed a curtsy as well. "Your Grace, it has been a considerable time." "It has," he agreed. His gaze held her for a moment, searching but not presumptuous. "I am sorry to learn, Lady Eleanor, that—" He broke off, as if uncertain whether it would be kinder to speak of Harbury or kinder to ignore the subject entirely. She spared him the decision. "I am persuaded it will soon be quite forgotten," she said lightly. "Bath is full of interesting distractions." "I am not at all persuaded," he said quietly. "But I admire your determination." The exchange might have ended there. It did not, for two matrons standing near the fountain, believing themselves unheard, began to converse in tones just audible enough. "She carries it very well, I must say," said one, "though to be jilted so close to the day, and they say she once refused Averton." "Indeed?" "Then perhaps this is justice of a sort," replied the other, with the acid relish of one who delights in symmetry. Eleanor's cheeks burned. Mrs. Lindley's back stiffened. Adrian's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Lindley," he said, "the room appears close. Might I suggest a short turn by the windows for Lady Eleanor? The air is somewhat clearer there." Her aunt agreed at once. Eleanor took his arm because refusing it would have drawn even more attention. They walked in silence for several steps. "Forgive me," he said at last, "that you must endure such vulgar speculation." "It is unavoidable," she replied. "I can hardly expect the world to ignore such an entertainment." "You are not an entertainment." "I am at present precisely that," she said, though without bitterness. "But in time they will find something else to speak of." He glanced at her, his gaze sharpening. "You are altered," he said. "Am I so much changed?" "In some ways, no," he answered slowly. You stand as straight as ever and guard your opinions as fiercely. But there is—" he hesitated. "There is a gravity in you that was not there 3 years ago." "You are altered as well," she said. "When you left for the continent, you were all impatience and unwilling duty. Now you look as if you have been carrying duty more willingly for some time." A faint, rueful smile touched his mouth. "We none of us escape growing older." "That is not the same thing as growing wiser," she said, and he almost laughed. He sobered an instant later. "I should tell you, I am not in Bath alone. My mother is here, and my fiancé." She felt the word like a physical blow, and was grateful her hand rested on his arm, else she might have stumbled. "Allow me to congratulate you, Your Grace," she said, marshalling her composure. "I had not heard of your engagement." "No," he said. "It was only settled some months ago. Lady Caroline Montford." Lady Caroline, Eleanor knew, was widely admired, beautiful, accomplished, unblemished by scandal, exactly the sort of lady a duke should marry. "I wish you every happiness," she said. He inclined his head. "You are kind." But something in his tone made her think he did not feel particularly fortunate. She released his arm. "I must return to my aunt." "As you wish." He bowed and left her, his posture once more that of a man whose life was arranged in calm lines. Eleanor watched him go and felt, for the first time since Harbury's defection, something other than wounded pride. She felt the uneasy stirring of an old, very unwelcome tenderness. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Gardens. Bath's rhythms asserted themselves swiftly. Mornings brought promenades and visits to the pump room, afternoons meant drives, calls, or walks in the gardens. Evenings belonged to cards, music, and the assembly rooms. Eleanor, determined not to become the object of more curiosity by absence than by presence, allowed herself to be coaxed into joining these rituals, though always with a slight air of reluctance, as if she might yet escape. It was during one such morning stroll that she encountered Adrian a second time. Sydney Gardens glowed under a mild sun. Children darted among the trees, elderly gentlemen walked with canes and grave care. Ladies strolled in pairs, their pelisses fluttering softly. Eleanor had chosen a quieter path near the canal, hoping for a little space. She should have known that solitude would not last. "Lady Eleanor." She turned. Adrian approached alone, his hat in his hand, his pace unhurried. She inclined her head, finding she could not quite summon the indifference she had rehearsed. "Your Grace." "I hope I am not intruding," he said. "If you prefer your walk alone, I shall withdraw at once." There was a time she would have answered him with some quick deflecting jest. Now, after all her recent mortifications, honesty seemed simpler. "Solitude has been my chief companion these last weeks," she said. "I confess, it is sometimes oppressive." His expression changed, very slightly, but she saw the shadow of concern. "Then perhaps you will allow me to walk with you for a short distance," he replied, "if only to provide variety in your solitude." She almost smiled. "Very well." They fell into step. For a time they walked in silence, the sounds of other people's conversations drifting faintly across the lawn. "May I ask," he said at last, "if you have received any word from Harbury since—" "None," she replied, "and I would not wish to. It would serve no purpose but to revive what I am attempting to forget." "I understand." "Do you?" she asked, more curiously than sharply. He considered. "I know something of endings that come without any true explanation," he said. "When my father died, he left me a dukedom, a scattering of advice, and a collection of debts I was expected to turn myself into a paragon overnight, and know precisely how to proceed. I'm not sure I ever received any explanation for the life I was suddenly required to lead." "That is hardly comparable," she said gently. In all but the scale of it, perhaps not, he admitted. But I do know what it is to feel confused and to be told by everyone around you that you ought to be grateful. She looked at him. There it was, that quiet, unexpected understanding she had once found so dangerous. People have said the most astonishing things to me, she confessed. Several have congratulated me upon my escape, as if being publicly rejected were a fortunate event. Others assure me it will be forgotten in a week, which I know to be untrue. Some seem almost pleased to have something new to talk of. They are intolerable, Adrian said, with more feeling than he had yet shown. Not all, she said. My friend Anne has been kindness itself, but society as a whole. It is difficult to feel composed when one knows one's pain is being discussed as lively entertainment. He was quiet a moment. When I overheard those women in the pump room mention you, I wished— He stopped himself, then continued more carefully. I found it necessary to remove myself before I said something I might regret. You have always been careful not to say what you might regret, she observed. His mouth quirked. You say that as if it were a failing. Perhaps it is only that I remember a younger version of you, who sometimes spoke first and considered duty afterwards. A lamentable youth, he said. A youth who once believed he might do something for his own happiness, rather than everyone else's, she replied, very quietly. He looked at her then, and their shared history hung between them like a half-forgotten melody. It was broken by the sound of a light, cheerful voice. Averton, there you are. Mamma said you had vanished. Lady Caroline Montford, fresh as a spring flower in a pale blue pelisse, approached with a brisk step. Her fair curls peeked from beneath her bonnet. Her blue eyes, when they fell upon Eleanor, struck her as coolly assessing. Lady Eleanor, Caroline said, with a polite inclination of her head, what a pleasant surprise. We are all meeting in the gardens this morning, are we not? So it seems, Eleanor answered. Caroline's arm slipped through Adrian's in an instinctive gesture. Averton, your mother is waiting to consult you about this evening's engagement. I fear if you delay much longer, she will begin inviting half of Bath to dine merely out of impatience. A faint line appeared near Adrian's mouth. I shall attend her directly. Caroline turned back to Eleanor. You must allow us to call. I have long desired to make your acquaintance, having heard so much of you. Eleanor could not help wondering from whom so much had been heard, and of what nature it was. You are very kind, Lady Caroline. No, I am selfish, Caroline replied, with a laugh that might have been charming in other circumstances. I am always eager for new allies in such a crowded little world as Bath. She gave a cheerful farewell and led Adrian away. He glanced back, swiftly, almost guiltily, before disappearing among the laurel bushes. Eleanor walked on. She was no longer certain whether solitude was oppressive or preferable. A call and a confidant. 2 days later, Lady Caroline made good on her promise to call. Mrs. Lindley, whose curiosity had been piqued, received her with marked graciousness. Eleanor, seated by the window with her embroidery, watched the entrance of the Duke's fiancée with the keen attention one gives to a portrait one has long heard of, but never seen. Caroline was very nearly perfect. Her figure was elegant, her dress fashionable without being ostentatious, her manner lively and yet untouched by vulgarity. She spoke easily of London, of concerts and routs and charitable subscriptions. When the conversation turned to the discomforts of travel, she demonstrated just enough feeling to avoid insipidity. Only once did Eleanor detect a hint of uncertainty. It was when Caroline asked, with studied casualness, You must know Bath well, Lady Eleanor. I am rather dependent on Averton and his cousin James to guide me, but cousins are not always the most patient of attendants. You could not be in better hands, Eleanor said, perhaps more gravely than the remark required. Indeed, Averton has always been steady, Caroline acknowledged. He speaks of duty as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I sometimes wonder if he thinks of anything else. There was, in that brief confession, a shadow of human frailty that surprised Eleanor. For the first time, she thought, she too is trying to make her way in this arrangement. A sound at the door announced another visitor. The footman announced, "Lord James Thorne." Adrian's cousin entered with the easy, faintly irreverent manner of a man who has never yet been punished for speaking too freely. He greeted Mrs. Lindley warmly, bowed over Eleanor's hand with a flourish that made her smile despite herself, and saluted Caroline as if she were a commanding officer. "My mother sent me to rescue you, Caroline," he said. "She fears you may be suffering excess propriety." "Your mother has no respect for propriety," Caroline replied, amused. Lord James's gaze flicked between Eleanor and Caroline with quick intelligence. He chatted lightly, but Eleanor sensed that he observed more than he allowed to appear when Caroline and Mrs. Lindley drifted into a discussion of a charitable bazaar. James took the opportunity to seat himself near Eleanor. "May I speak plainly, Lady Eleanor?" he asked, his tone unexpectedly earnest. "Provided you do not expect me to answer in kind," she replied. He smiled. "A fair warning. I only wish to say that Averton is not himself of late. He is more taciturn than usual, and considering his natural disposition, that is saying much." "I cannot imagine how that concerns me," she said, though her heart sped. "I imagine it concerns you considerably," said James, "and I imagine you are far too proud to admit it. I am not so proud on his behalf. He has been a good cousin to me. I do not like to see him engaged to one lady while looking as if he were constantly thinking of another." She said nothing. The words hung between them, heavy and startling. James lowered his voice. "Caroline is not unfeeling, but she is very conscious of what is due to her. If this engagement is to be broken, it must be done soon, else it will hurt her far more. I cannot oblige Averton to act, but I can make certain he understands that others see what he thinks he conceals." "You believe he will speak?" she asked, the question escaping her. "I believe," said James, "that if he does not speak, he will be miserable. And I have no wish to spend the next 30 years listening to my cousin's silence." He rose before she could reply, rejoined the others, and turned the subject to some absurd story about a mishap with horses that made Caroline laugh. Eleanor sat very still. She had come to Bath to escape the wreckage of one engagement. It seemed she had walked straight into the heart of another storm. Chapter 3. Among the Whisperers. It was impossible in Bath to remain invisible. Within a fortnight, Eleanor's name had appeared in a small but widely read column of observations penned by a certain Mrs. Willoughby, an amiable widow with a sharp eye and a sharper pen. Mrs. Willoughby, who liked to protest that she merely wrote what others already thought, had taken to describing in light-handed, teasing terms the comings and goings of Bath society. One morning, while taking tea, Mrs. Lindley read aloud, "Lady E.F. lately arrived from town, bears her trials with remarkable composure. Certain gentlemen might envy the firmness of her spine. Observers note that the Duke of A. appears frequently in the same air she breathes. Whether this is due to chance, inclination, or the configuration of the pump-room, I shall not presume to say." "At least she spared your full name," said Mrs. Lindley, half indignant and half amused. "Her restraint is admirable," Eleanor replied, though her cheeks warmed. The mention of the Duke, even in initials, was enough to renew interest. Whispers thickened. Some people decided the broken London engagement must have been fate's merciful preparation for a more brilliant match. Others predicted ruin for all parties. Lady Caroline's name, when it appeared, was treated with greater circumspection, but it, too, found its way into the column. Eleanor bore it as best she could. She attended an evening at the upper rooms where, as she entered on her aunt's arm, she heard one lady say, "There is the heroine of Mrs. Willoughby's latest piece." Another replied, "And there, the Duke himself, how convenient." The rooms were crowded and bright, candles flickered from the chandeliers. Violins sent their light music spinning across polished floors. Eleanor danced once, twice with gentlemen who were kind enough not to mention Harbury or the column, yet she had the sense of moving within a circle of scrutiny. Adrian arrived with his mother and Lady Caroline. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, bore herself with majestic serenity. Caroline's beauty shone under the candlelight. She seemed the very picture of a future duchess. Eleanor had every intention of keeping her distance. She failed. During a pause between dances, she moved toward an open window for air. The night outside was cool. The crescent glowed faintly under the moon. Standing slightly apart from the crowd, she could almost pretend she was alone. "You stand just far enough away to appear entirely unapproachable," said a low voice behind her, "and just near enough to tempt the foolishness of others." She turned. Adrian stood there, hands clasped behind his back. His tone was light, but his eyes were not. "Your Grace," she said, "I am merely seeking a moment's reprieve." "From the room or from its inhabitants?" he asked. "From speculation," she answered. "But I begin to suspect there is nowhere in Bath where speculation is not the principal occupation." "Then I must be careful," he said, "or our mere proximity will provide Mrs. Willoughby with an entire column." "She has already observed that you breathe the same air as I," Eleanor replied. "I am not sure what more she can say." "I am," he murmured, almost to himself. Their eyes met. Between them lay years of silence, present confusion, and a future as yet undecided. "I have made a decision," he said suddenly. "I intend to speak with Caroline tomorrow." Her heart gave a leap and then sank. "To what purpose?" "To end our engagement," he said. She stared, the room spinning faintly around the edges. "You cannot," she whispered. "I must. It is a matter of honour." "What of her honour?" Eleanor demanded, a little more sharply than she intended. "What of the pain to her family? You think society cruel now. How will it treat you when you cast off a bride whose only fault is not being the woman you cannot forget?" He flinched, but held her gaze. "I have considered all that," he said. "I have weighed it over and over. It is because she deserves better than a half-hearted husband that I must speak. If the engagement continues, she will one day find herself married to a man who performs every duty except loving her. That would be the greater cruelty." His words, measured and sincere, disarmed her. The scene blurred. She turned back toward the window to steady herself. "And what is it you expect from me, if you end it?" she asked softly. "Approval? Gratitude? I have already been the cause of enough talk. I have no wish to be made again the centre of a scandal." "I expect nothing," he answered, equally soft. "Only that you know I cannot live the rest of my life pretending my heart is not where it is." Silence. "Eleanor," he said, for once abandoning her title. "I wrote that letter, asking you to meet me in the gardens because I could not bear another day of concealment. Tomorrow I shall speak to Caroline. After that, whatever you choose, I will abide by it." She closed her eyes briefly. Her heart and her sense of propriety waged their quiet, desperate battle. "Do not make me the arbitrator of your conscience," she said. "You are the arbiter of my happiness," he replied. Before she could answer, a bright voice cut through the air. "Averton, there you are." Caroline approached, her expression perfectly composed, though her eyes took in the scene with swift comprehension. "We are due to play a hand of whist," she said. "Mamma is most insistent." "Of course," Adrian said, reverting at once to proper formality. Caroline turned to Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor, I hope you are enjoying the evening." "Very much," Eleanor lied. Caroline's gaze lingered a moment, then she said, in a tone of careful pleasantness that carried just a hint of steel, "Bath is a most diverting place. one never wants for subjects of interest. Eleanor gave a small bow. Indeed. Caroline drew Adrian away. Eleanor watched them go, aware that Mrs. Willoughby, somewhere in the room, probably had her pen ready. Later that evening, as Eleanor and her aunt returned home in their carriage, Mrs. Lindley squeezed her hand. My dear, whatever comes, you must remember that you are not responsible for other people's weaknesses. Eleanor stared out at the passing lamps. No, she said quietly, but I fear I may yet be responsible for their suffering. Chapter 4. Choices at the Bridge. The letter arrived early the next morning. Eleanor recognized Adrian's hand at once. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Eleanor, by the time you receive this, I shall already have spoken with Caroline. If I have wronged her, I shall bear the blame. She deserves the truth, as do you. If you cannot forgive my past silence or my present boldness, I will not presume to ask anything further. But if there remains in you any memory of what once existed between us, meet me at the stone bridge in Sydney Gardens at 11A-. She read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into her reticule. Her aunt appeared at breakfast with the morning's news. Eleanor, there is talk, only the faintest, but Mrs. Willoughby called just now on her way to the post and mentioned that the Montfords have closed their drawing-room this morning. Lady Caroline has a headache. Eleanor's spoon rattled faintly in her saucer. I see, she said. Her aunt studied her. You are as pale as if you had the headache yourself. Have you received any intelligence that I should be aware of? Eleanor met her gaze. There was comfort and a gentle insistence in those familiar eyes. Only that the Duke requested to meet me in the gardens, she said, to inform me of what he has done. Mrs. Lindley took this in, folded her napkin, and nodded once. Then I believe you must go. You do not think it wrong? I think, her aunt replied, that you have been wronged quite enough by men arranging your life without your consent. You will go, listen to what he has to say, and then decide whether you will permit him to make further plans that concern you, that is all. Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat. Thank you, Aunt. The stone bridge stood where the canal curved gently, the water glimmering in the pale daylight. Eleanor arrived a little before 11. She had not wished to wait at home any longer. Adrian was already there. He looked as if he had slept poorly. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes, and his usually impeccable composure seemed strained, as if he were holding himself together by sheer force of will. Eleanor, he said, Your Grace. He flinched at the formality. May I be Adrian? Just this once. She hesitated, then inclined her head. Very well. Thank you. He drew a breath. I have spoken with Caroline. And? He looked out over the water for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. She suspected it, he said at last. Perhaps not the full extent, but she sensed my restlessness. She asked me whether there was another lady. I told her there was someone I had loved longer than I had understood, and that I could not in conscience go through with a marriage while that remained true. Eleanor's throat tightened. How did she receive that? With more dignity than I deserve, he replied. She was angry, justly. She spoke of her family, her expectations, her humiliation. But she also said that she would rather be disappointed now than trapped in a cold marriage. She released me from my word, though I am not sure she will soon forgive. And her family? They will likely not forgive at all, he said dryly. Nor will certain members of my own. I have been thoroughly lectured on my duty, my mother. She understands more than she shows, but even she thinks I have acted recklessly. You have, Eleanor said. He looked at her, startled. You have acted recklessly, she repeated with quiet emphasis, but not unjustly. There is a difference. A faint line eased from his brow. Do you think so? I think, she said slowly, that Caroline's pride will heal. She will find another, perhaps better suited to her. She is lovely, accomplished, and unencumbered by scandal. She will not lack for offers. But you, if you had married her while caring for another woman, you would have done her a greater wrong. You absolve me too easily, he said. No, I merely acknowledge that truth is painful, but falsehood is fatal. He stared at her a long moment, something like hope waking in his gaze. Eleanor, he said quietly, I did not break my engagement on the chance of being forgiven. I did it because it was necessary. But I must now ask what I have scarcely permitted myself to hope for. She felt the air shift. Can you ever consider becoming my wife? The words hung between them, simple yet immense. She thought of him as he had been, earnest, uncertain, offering his heart 3 years ago when she had refused him out of fear and pride. She thought of him now, steady, flawed, willing to endure censure rather than live dishonestly. She thought of Harbury's cowardice, of Caroline's wounded dignity, of her own longings hidden under layers of composure. You ask much, she said at last. I know, he replied. You ask me to step back into a world that has twice now watched my private life as entertainment. You ask me to marry into a family some of whom will blame me for what has happened. You ask me to trust that you will not again choose duty over affection at some critical moment. He bowed his head. All that is true. She took a breath, feeling the weight of his expectations and her own. But you also offer me, she continued, the one thing I had quietly given up hoping for. A husband who sees me as more than an ornament or a convenience, a man who is willing to suffer society's disapproval rather than bind us both to a life devoid of feeling. I cannot pretend that does not touch me. His hands, clasped before him, tightened. I will never promise that our life will be free of difficulty, he said. I have duties that will sometimes separate us. There will be expectations and demands, but I can promise that you will never be taken for granted or spoken of as a burden. I thought myself incapable once of expressing such things. I am learning otherwise. If you refuse me again, I shall not reproach you. I will merely know that I have lost what I value most. She regarded him for a heartbeat more. Then she said very quietly, I do not intend to refuse you again. His breath left him in a soft, almost incredulous exhale. Eleanor. She lifted a hand, stopping him from stepping closer than propriety allowed. They stood only a little apart, but the distance was filled with understanding. You must speak to my aunt, she said, cheeks pink. I will not run away with you, however tempted I may be to escape the whispers. Never, he said. We shall face them together. I give you my word. He offered his arm. She took it. Together they walked back along the path, the future uncertain, but chosen. Epilogue, a different sort of talk. The engagement, when announced, produced the expected storm. Some declared it romantic, others scandalous, a few both at once. Mrs. Willoughby devoted an entire column to it, concluding with, It appears that a lady may be jilted and yet not remain on the shelf, provided she possesses both fortitude and a spine of very particular construction. Anne Durrant wrote from London delighted, You see, my dear Eleanor, some men reconsider in the wrong direction, and some in the right one. Caroline departed Bath sooner than planned. Eleanor, encountering her briefly at a morning call before she left, curtsied with sincere respect. I wish you happiness, Lady Caroline, she said. You deserve a husband who loves you entirely. Caroline's eyes softened. And you deserve the same, she replied, with a frankness that surprised them both. I shall hate you a little for a time, but I am not such a fool as to hate you forever. They parted with no further words, but with something like a truce. Eleanor and Adrian were married in a quiet ceremony that summer. The chapel overlooked fields cut by hedgerows and a line of distant hills. Only family and a few close friends attended. Lord James stood up with Adrian and afterward declared that he had never seen his cousin look both so terrified and so content at once. As they stepped out into the clear air, Adrian offered his arm to Eleanor, his eyes holding hers with settled warmth. "Thank you," he said softly, "for changing your mind." She smiled. "Thank you for changing yours." They walked forward together, through the murmured congratulations, the rustle of silk, the sunlight on stone. Whatever Bath chose to say of them thereafter, whatever future duties and difficulties awaited, Eleanor knew this. She had returned to Bath broken, and was leaving it with her heart not merely mended, but strengthened. Some loves survived distance, pride, and the clamour of the world. Theirs, she believed, would be one of them. The end. If you've enjoyed this story of love, redemption, and quiet courage, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you'll be the first to hear our next Regency romance on the Regency Gazette channel. Thank you for listening.